In today's video, I'm going to show you the steps I took to create this seascape painting in watercolour. Let's get to it. So to begin with, I'm using my Molotow Masking fluid pen to mask off all the areas that I want to preserve as white for the time being. And once that's dried, I'm then going to start on my sky and my sea, starting off by just wetting down the sea and the sky area. I want the page to be glistening. I don't want any puddles or pools of water. Just want to dampen that background because we're going to use a wet on wet technique to create the clouds and the sky and the sea. So I'm just dabbing in now some cerulean blue, just watered down cerulean blue, and dabbing it in where I want that to create some sky. I'm leaving some areas white because I want some fluffy clouds in this painting. I'm now using some watered down ultramarine just to set where I want the sea to be meeting the sky. And then I'm going over with a slightly less diluted version of that ultramarine colour. Once I've got that in, I'm going to go over with a clean damp brush, and I'm just going to lift off where the paint is where I don't want it, because a damp wet brush will help lift off any unwanted paint. Now going back into the sky, back with that cerulean blue, a little less diluted than before, and just darkening up some of the sky area, and then going in again with that damp wet brush just to lift up those clouds. I'm going to keep doing those steps until the sea and the sky are how I want them to look. I'm now starting on the sand area. I'm using yellow ochre with a little bit of burnt umber and a tiny bit of purple just to knock the yellow out, to lay down the sand where I want it to be. And now I'm going in with some burnt umber, and I'm dotting in the shadows that I can see in the beach, because there are stones and there are some footsteps and stuff like that, and I want to make sure I get those in, just dabbing in that colour. A bit more concentrated burnt umber now, still again, just dabbing it in to create those shadows, and I'll repeat with all these colours until I get the beach to look how I want it. So again, darker still around the bottom of the posts. There are more stones around there, so I wanted a bit more definition, a bit more of the suggestion of more texture in the sand around those areas. And around this area here is where there's some bushes coming over, and so I wanted some shadows there. So keep on layering those colours until I get the beach to look the way that I want it to look. And once it's dry, I can always go back later, which I will do. Working on the shrubbery and the bushes now, I'm using sap green. I'm just going over where I want the green to be, just laying out a base layer, but I'm still trying to keep my brush strokes going in the direction that the foliage and the green is going. So keep going with that. I'm sort of tending to work in sections and just blocking in the bits as I go, and then blocking in some movement of the bushes on that right hand side. I will come back later to work on that a bit more. I've now added a bit of burnt umber to my sap green, and I'm just lightly adding in some shadows. Still working in the direction that I want that shrubbery to go, but I don't want to completely cover over my base layers, so I'm working in sort of flicking strokes to get those colours in. At the top on the left, there is some dark sort of broken tree-like shrubbery. It's not quite trees, I'm not sure what it is, but it was dark and stick-like. So I'm putting the base layer in for that as well. This needs to be much darker, but I'm just starting with that burnt umber and just lightly adding in roughly where I want that to go. I'll come in and add shadows and depth to that a bit later on. Now those are in, I'm just lifting off some of the harsher lines with a clean damp brush, I should say, before I go over with my sap green once again. It's just a bit more of a concentrated mixture this time, not quite as much water in as I had the first time round. And again, just building up the green, using sort of flicking strokes to create a grassy texture. And then if I think I've gone overboard, that clean damp brush just to lift off. That will only work when it's wet though, so Be careful, if your paint has dried, that won't work. So I've added a bit more burnt umber to my green now, adding in some more shadows, and a bit more depth to the brush. And this is basically just as with any other painting or drawing I do, it's a layering process. I start light, I work to darker. So building up again my grass texture. I tend to use just two colours or three colours for the grass. I'm using the sap green, and I mix varying amounts of water and varying amounts of burnt umber in with that. I'll also be using a hooker's green a bit later on as well. And again, varying amounts of burnt umber in that, just to take some of the green away so that it looks a bit more natural. And then I'm just layering up the different concentrations of those colours. See, sap green again with a lot of some burnt umber in there, blocking in where the big grass goes. And now there are trees and some bracken area at the top of this as well. And so I'm just plotting that in, mapping that in on that right hand side. Paying attention to where all of the grass is going, the direction it's going. I don't want it to go in a uniform way. It's quite messy grass, various different directions. Make sure you're following your reference photo. I'm darkening up now. I've added some more burnt umber to the mix. I'm just defining more where the shape of all of that grass is going on the right hand side. It's a lot darker, a lot more in shadow on the right hand side. So I'm just gradually building it up. If you find that it's not working as you want it to and your paint's all blending together, wait for it to dry completely and then start going over it again. So just working on those the layers of this grass now, building it up. I think I've got the a bit of hooker's green there that I'm adding in now, again with the burnt umber mixed in. Just to add some variation to the grass and the shadows, because it's not all one colour. Yeah, that's definitely the hooker's green now with a bit of burnt umber in there. So again, paying attention to your reference photo, where those darks and lights are. I'm trying to be a lot more loose in this picture than I normally am. So I'm trying to give more of an impression of the grass and of the sand and everything, rather than trying to get it exact like I normally would. And there are little sticks sticking up out of the sand as well, so I'm using a bit of burnt umber in places just to suggest those as well. And again, just back building up and building up and building up all the texture and the layers, and just repeat the process. When you see me moving around, it's just because I need to let some areas dry. I didn't like how light the sea was, so I'm just going back through with my turquoise once again, and I'm just building up some of the shadows in the sky as well, but still trying to leave the clouds, because I still want the suggestion of fluffy clouds in there. I'm just trying to sort of brighten up and darken up the sky a little bit, and then if I've gone too far, I'm lifting up with a tissue. Again, wet brush, clean damp brush, sorry, just working on that horizon, making sure that's where it should be. Adding some darks in there. It'll be burnt umber with a bit of Payne's grey in that, just to give some extra dark shadows on this right hand side. Now see how this doesn't look particularly great just yet. It's a bit of a hot mess. Most paintings will go through this stage. Just keep working on them until they don't look like a mess anymore. I'm now making sure that I've dried off my picture, because it's time to take off the masking fluid. I'm just using a tea towel to do that. It saves your fingers. It makes life go a lot quicker as well. And now I'm starting to map in my posts. My posts have used Payne grey, which is like a bluey grey, with a little bit of purple. I'm just using a light wash of that and then lifting up where I want the lighter side to be on that post, and then going in with a more concentrated Payne's grey mixture to add in, with a small brush, to add in the details. And again, you don't have to be exact, just close enough, as we're just doing an impression of that. I'm going to do the same with every single one of these posts. So light wash to begin with and adding in some shadows. Once that's dried a bit, I can go in and add a few more precise details. While it's wet, remember it's all going to do wet and wet, it's going to smoosh together. So when you let it dry a little bit, you'll be able to add a few finer details, which is what I'm doing now in some of the darks on these posts, because I want it to look like wood that's been there for years. So I want the impression of cracks and shadows that you get. Now adding some finer details in with some of the shrubs and brush just around those posts, just to merge them in a bit better, working along the bottom of the posts so that they don't look so stark, because they do need to be part of the painting. Remember, they were masked off, so they're very harsh to begin with. I'm using some yellow ochre to add some more of the sticks and dry brush that's coming out of the sand. And again, some sort of slightly darker greens just behind those posts. I want the posts to stand out. Again, a few smaller details with all the dry branches and brushes that are around. I'm now adding some highlights throughout my grass. This is going to start bringing the whole thing together and bring it to life. I'm using gouache, white gouache, to add some highlights in. It will be too harsh in places at the moment, but don't worry about that, because I'm going to glaze over them in a little bit. The more water you add, the more translucent the colour. It's always going to look really bright when you first apply it, but it will dry a lot lighter than what it is. So don't think that you've gone too mad. When it looks really bright, the more water you've added, the more translucent that's going to look. So I'm just going adding some more highlights to my sky and my clouds, in with the posts, in through all of the grass, and a little bit in the sea. It's quite watered down version in the sea and the sky. And now you can see, as I said, I'm glazing over with the greens to pull those whites in, but they'll still stay highlighted. So where I've got a bit mad with my paint, those highlights are now going to show through. And I say, once the gouache is dry, I've gone over with the wash just to pull everything all back together. I'm now darkening up some of my and defining some of the stick areas a bit more. I'd say they're like dry branches, but not. It's a weird texture. And I'm just fussing throughout the painting with all my greens and my grass, and just getting the final details in, adding highlights where I need to, adding darks where I need to. And now the best bit is removing the masking tape to reveal the painting. I did realise as I was doing this that I'd forgotten to add the wires to my fences. So after I've taken the masking tape off, I've gone back through with some gouache mixed with a little bit of blue, and I've used a liner brush just to add those wires in. That brings the whole picture together and makes the fence look right. Thank you all for watching. If you found this video useful, please leave me a thumbs up. I post new content every Thursday. If you don't want to miss anything, please press the subscribe button below. You can also press that bell icon. It makes sure that you get notified by YouTube for all new content I post. That's it from me now. Bye, guys.